Investing in index funds is one of the most powerful ways to build your wealth passively in the stock market. It's no wonder why many self-made millionaires use them as a way to build their fortune, and why Warren Buffett, one of the greatest investors of all time, thinks that most people should be investing in index funds. And today, I'm gonna walk you through the entire process, step by step, of how exactly to invest in index funds. We're gonna start with the basics and answer the question, what exactly is an index fund? An index fund is a type of investment that tracks a specific stock market index, thus the name index fund. And a stock market index is basically just a group of stocks, bonds, and other investments that trade on the stock market. For example, one of the most popular stock market indexes is the S&P 500, which is an index that tracks the 500 largest publicly traded companies in the US. And so if you have an index fund that tracks the S&P 500 index, that index fund buys shares of stock from every company listed on the S&P 500 index. And by doing this, that index fund is going to mirror the gains and losses of that specific index. And this is different from, say, an individual stock, because when you invest in an individual stock, you're just buying shares of one company. For example, when you buy shares of Apple stock, you are literally investing in Apple the company. On the contrary, when you buy shares of an index fund, you're not just investing in one company. Instead, you're investing in one part of the stock market, which contains hundreds, sometimes even thousands of individual stocks. And this begs the question, why should you invest in index funds in the first place? For starters, index funds promise ownership of a wide variety of stocks. When you buy shares of an index fund such as VT-SAX or the Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund, this one index fund holds over 4,000 stocks from over 4,000 different companies. And so when you buy shares of VT-SAX, it's basically like you're investing in 4,000 plus companies instantly. And this is the primary reason why you should be investing in index funds, because they give your portfolio much greater diversification and lower your overall risk compared to something like individual stocks. Now, when it comes to investing in index funds, what things should you be looking for? In other words, to ensure that you're maximizing your investment returns over time, what criteria should you be looking at when choosing your index funds? The first and arguably most important thing to look at is the expense ratio of the index fund. The expense ratio is basically just how much money the fund is taking off the top of your investment every single year. And ideally, you would want the expense ratio to be as low as possible. My general rule of thumb is to seek index funds that have an expense ratio below 0.05%. And a good example of an index fund that has a low expense ratio is VT-SAX. VT-SAX has an expense ratio of 0.04%. This means that you'll only have to pay 40 cents per year for every $1,000 that you invest. The next thing that you'll want to pay attention to is how closely that index fund mirrors the performance of the underlying index. For example, if I went and checked the returns of VT-SAX, you can see that this index fund's returns are basically identical to the underlying index that it's tracking. And so this is a good thing because it means that the index fund is being properly managed. And the third thing that you'll want to pay attention to is to make sure that the index fund that you're investing in is indeed an index fund and not an ETF. And the reason this is so important is because the two handle dividend reinvesting very different. When you invest in index funds, you have the option to automatically have your dividends reinvested for you back into buying more shares of that index fund. But this is not the case with ETFs, okay? ETFs do not have this feature. Now, some brokers may offer this as an option where within the app, they'll have an option for you to automatically reinvest your dividends, and that's cool, but it's not always an option when investing in ETFs. Okay, so now that you are an index fund expert, how do you actually start investing in index funds? Let's say, for example, that you wanted to invest in VFIX, which is the Vanguard 500 Index Fund. Well, broadly speaking, and there is a small caveat to this, the only way that you'll be able to invest in that Vanguard Index Fund is if you have a Vanguard brokerage account. And the same thing is true with other index funds offered from other brokers. Now, the caveat to this is that technically speaking, some brokers do offer you the opportunity to invest in other index funds from outside brokers, but there is a big catch. For example, if you wanted to invest in Vanguard index funds through your Fidelity brokerage account, it would cost you a massive $75 per transaction. That's right, $75. And this transaction fee varies from broker to broker, but typically it's not uncommon for them to be pretty high. And although some brokers like Vanguard won't charge a transaction fee for buying outside index funds, it doesn't mean that the outside broker still won't charge you a transaction fee for buying their index fund. And so with all that being said, just to keep things as simple as possible, I would recommend that you open up a brokerage account with the broker whose index funds you plan on investing in. And so if you know that you want to invest in Vanguard index funds, then open up a Vanguard brokerage account. You want to invest in Fidelity index funds, open up a Fidelity brokerage account. Charles Schwab, open up Charles Schwab, and so on. Now, with that being said, if you currently have a brokerage account with Robinhood or M1 Finance or any of these newer brokers, you will not not be able to invest in index funds. However, most index funds will have an ETF equivalent to that index fund that can be traded at any broker. And although ETFs and index funds are extremely similar, there are some key differences between the two, and for some people, investing in index funds just makes more sense. And this actually brings up another very important question, and that's, what are the best index funds to invest in? What I'm gonna do here is lay out a few of the most common investing scenarios that fit for most people. And then I'm gonna show you the best index funds to invest in based on that specific scenario, as well as what I believe to be the best portfolio allocation based on your specific investing goal. If your investing goal is not on the screen, comment down below what your goal is, and I'll give you my personal suggestions based on your goal. And of course, I have to say it, but my suggestions are not financial advice. But anyways, the first and probably the most common investing scenario is I'm investing for retirement. I want to maximize my returns for retirement. And if that's you, if that's the reason you're investing, then here are, in my opinion, the best index funds to invest in based off of that specific goal. In terms of your portfolio's allocation, if you're investing for retirement and have more than 10 years left until you retire, I would say something like this: 70% US and 30% international, using any of the listed index funds. And of course, if you wanted to, you could swap out some of the total US stock market index funds for S&P 500 equivalents. You can see that I'm grouping these index funds together, and that's because they're basically the same index funds but offered by different brokers. Now, this type of allocation will give your portfolio extremely broad exposure to not only the US stock market but also to the international stock market. And the reason for this broad exposure is because if you're investing long term, it's best to put your eggs in as many baskets as possible to take all of the guesswork out of investing. The next common investing scenario is you're investing not necessarily for retirement, but just to build your wealth in general. And because of this, you're willing to be as aggressive as possible with your investing. And if this is you, then these are some of the best index funds to invest in. And so we've got a mixture of growth index funds and small cap index funds from different brokers. And the example portfolio allocation for this scenario would look like this: about 20% of your portfolio being invested into a total stock market index fund, another 40% being invested into a growth index fund, 20% being invested into a small cap index fund, and the remaining 20% being invested into an international index fund. And so what's happening here with this allocation is you're intentionally tilting your portfolio toward more aggressive stocks by investing in both growth and small cap index funds. But you're still including a broad market index fund and giving yourself exposure to international markets. The next common investing scenario is that you're investing for a big purchase within the next 2 to 5 years. In that case, I would actually avoid index funds altogether and either save your money in a high yield savings account or invest into a Series I savings bond. Overall though, choosing what ETFs to invest in will depend on your specific investment objectives. Now that you've decided what index funds you want to invest in, let's talk about how to actually buy an index fund. Because remember, index funds are not traded on the stock market, and so you can't buy and sell them the same way you would stocks or ETFs. So let's just say, as an example, that you decided to open up a Fidelity brokerage account because you want to invest in Fidelity index funds. But the first thing you'll do is open up your broker's trade window. And so I'll click up here and then click the drop down that says stocks/ETFs, and I'm gonna change this to mutual funds, because remember, an index fund is just a type of mutual fund. After that, I'll select which account I want to buy this index fund in, and I'll use my son's Roth IRA as an example. And then you'll just type in the name of the index fund that you want to invest in, and I'll use FZ Rocks as the example, and there it is. And then I'll click the drop down that says action, and I want to buy this index fund, and then I enter the dollar amount and then preview the order. If everything looks good, then go ahead and confirm it, and now you're officially investing in this index fund. And now that you're investing in your index fund, it's now time to set up dividend reinvesting, and here's exactly how you do it within Fidelity. I'm gonna click up here where it says more and then choose account features. From there, I'll choose brokerage and trading, and then dividends and capital gains. This will bring up a page that looks like this, and of course this will look a little bit different for other brokers, but by default, at least with Fidelity, this option under dividends will be selected as deposit to core account. And so what you'll do is click on update, and then make sure the option to reinvest in security is selected. And if you have multiple index funds that you're investing in, you can choose this option here that says all equity positions held in this account. And by selecting this, you'll apply the dividend reinvesting option to all the other index funds. You can also select this option here that says future equity purchases, transfers, and deposits to this account. And this means that any new money that enters your account will automatically be invested into the index fund. And the final thing that I want to talk about is how much money do you need to start investing in index funds. Most index funds are going to have a minimum investment requirement of between $1,000 and $3,000. The only exception to this that I've seen personally is Fidelity. Most of their index funds funds have a zero minimum investment requirement. And so, for example, if you had $100 to start investing, you would not be able to invest in any Vanguard index funds because most of Vanguard's funds have a $3,000 minimum investment requirement. But you would be able to start investing in Fidelity index funds because they typically don't have any investment requirements. And so how much money you need to invest in index funds will all depend on the broker that you decide to invest with. If you want my recommendation, I'm biased and I prefer Fidelity because Fidelity's index funds are a lot more forgiving for beginners, especially if you don't have a lot of money to begin with. You guys are truly amazing. I appreciate every single one of you. I mean it. And I hope that you have a beautiful rest of your day or night. And as always, I will see you again very soon. Take care.